You've written the entire caption. 3 paragraphs about what you've finally realized about yourself. The breakthrough you had last night. Your cursor hovers over the post button. You read it again. Something feels off. Not wrong, but hollow. Like watching yourself perform growth instead of actually living it. You delete the whole thing. Sit there in the quiet. And here's what nobody tells you. That deletion was more honest than anything you almost shared. We've been taught that healing happens in community. That vulnerability requires witnesses. That growth unspoken is growth wasted. So we document it. We post the lesson before we've actually learned it. We announce the boundary before we've tested whether we can hold it. We make declarations about who we're becoming before we've spent a single day being that person. And here's where it gets tricky. It's not that sharing is always wrong. It's that somewhere along the way, the sharing became the point. The announcement became the achievement. We started measuring our progress by how it looked to other people instead of how it felt inside our own chest. This happens because our brains don't distinguish well between doing something and being seen doing something. The validation we get from posting about our healing gives us a hit of dopamine. It feels like progress, but it's borrowed. It's progress on loan from other people's reactions. And when you build your growth on external validation, you need more and more of it to keep going. The real danger isn't that you share too much. It's that you start performing the healing instead of living it. You begin editing your internal experience for an audience that isn't even in the room. You choose the breakthrough that will sound good in a caption over the quiet, unglamorous work that actually changes you. You start to need the performance to believe the progress is real. That need is a trap. Because real transformation is mostly boring, it's repetitive. It doesn't come with before and after clarity. It happens in moments nobody sees and wouldn't understand even if they did. And the more you train yourself to need an audience for your growth, the less capable you become of doing the work in private. There's a psychological phenomenon that explains exactly what's happening here. It's called the Over-Justification Effect. Psychologists Mark Lepper and David Green studied this back in the 1970s. They found that when you take something someone is internally motivated to do and you add an external reward, the internal motivation actually decreases. Here's how they tested it. They gave kids markers and let them draw. Some kids just drew because they wanted to. Others were told they'd get a certificate for drawing. Later, when the researchers observed the kids during free time, the ones who'd been rewarded drew less. The external reward had replaced the internal drive. The thing they once did for its own sake became something they did for recognition. This is exactly what happens when you make your healing public before it's solid. The likes, the comments, the messages saying, "I needed to hear this," become the reward. And your brain starts doing the healing for that reward instead of for the actual internal shift. You're not drawing because you love it anymore. You're drawing for the certificate. The problem deepens because healing is not a performance art. It's an internal recalibration. When you expose it too early, you freeze it in place. You've made a public claim about who you are now, which means you have a reputation to maintain. And now you can't be messy. You can't backslide without it feeling like failure. You can't discover you were wrong about what you thought you learned, because you already taught it to 1,000 people. The over-justification effect shows us something crucial. External validation doesn't just fail to support internal growth, it actively undermines it. It shifts your attention from the thing itself to how the thing appears, and healing that's done for appearance is not healing, it's branding. None of this means you never share. But it means you have to be brutally honest about the order of operations. The work comes first. The integration comes second. The sharing, if it comes at all, comes last. And only when you don't need it to prove anything. Only when the growth is already solid enough that it doesn't require anyone else's belief to stay real. Here's what most people miss. When you announce your healing in real time, you're not documenting the journey, you're directing it. You become both the person changing and the person narrating the change. And those are two different jobs. They require two different kinds of attention. The person changing needs to be messy. confused, willing to try something, fail, try again differently. That person needs privacy the way a wound needs a bandage. Not forever, but long enough to close. The person narrating is performing coherence, crafting a story that makes sense, explaining the lesson before the lesson is learned. That person needs an audience, needs feedback, needs to know the story is landing. You can't do both at the same time without one destroying the other, and usually it's the narration that wins. Because narration feels productive. It feels like you're doing something. But really, you're just watching yourself and calling that growth. I've seen this in my own life more times than I want to admit. The journal entry that turned into a social media essay before the ink dried. The realization I handed to other people before I'd lived with it for even a week. And every single time, the insight lost its weight. Because I'd spent it too soon. I'd traded the depth of the change for the appearance of wisdom. Real growth is mostly silent. It doesn't announce itself. It simply becomes true. There's an economy to validation, and it works like any other market. The more you seek it, the more you need it. The more you need it, the more your behavior bends around getting it. And eventually, you're not healing anymore. You're just optimizing for applause. This is where people lose themselves. They start choosing the kind of growth that's visible, the kind that translates well to a story. They avoid the boring, repetitive, unglamorous work because it doesn't give them anything to show, and growth that can't be shown starts to feel like it doesn't count. But the deepest changes are the ones nobody sees. The moment you don't send the text, the boundary you hold without announcing, the trigger you feel and don't react to. These are invisible. They don't get likes. They don't generate comments. But they are the foundation of everything. When you chase validation for your healing, you end up with a strange kind of hollowness. You look like you're growing. People tell you you're inspiring. But inside, you feel like a fraud. Because you know the truth. You're performing the part. You haven't actually become the person yet. And here's the cruel irony. The validation you get makes it harder to do the real work. Because now you have an identity to protect. You've told everyone you're healing, which means you can't afford to fall apart again. Can't afford to admit you're still struggling. Can't afford to be human. You've traded the freedom to grow messy for the prison of looking like you've already grown. Privacy is not secrecy. Privacy is space. It's the room you give yourself to be wrong, to be confused, to try on a new version of yourself without witnesses. And that space is where real transformation happens. When you keep your healing private, you're free to fail. You don't have to explain why you're struggling again with something you said you'd overcome. You don't have to defend your process. You don't have to make it make sense to anyone but yourself. This is the advantage people mistake for isolation. They think going quiet means going alone. But it doesn't. It means choosing your witnesses carefully. It means sharing with the one or two people who are actually walking the road with you, not broadcasting to the crowd that's only watching. Private growth gives you the freedom to change your mind, to realize the thing you thought was the problem wasn't, to discover that the breakthrough you thought you had was only the first step, and you don't have to issue a retraction. You don't have to update your public narrative. You just keep walking. There's a different kind of confidence that comes from this. It's not the confidence of someone who needs you to believe in them. It's the confidence of someone who has watched themselves change when no one was looking. Who knows the work is real because it happened in the dark. That kind of confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It just is. Eventually, people notice. Not because you told them, but because you're different. You respond differently. You hold yourself differently. You've stopped explaining and started living. That's the only proof that matters. Not the post, not the declaration, not the public commitment. The proof is in how you move through the world when nobody's watching, when there's no audience, no camera, no caption. This is where you find out if the growth was real, if it holds up without applause, if it's solid enough to stand on when no one's cheering, and if it is, you don't need to talk about it. It talks for itself. The people who love you will see it. They'll notice you're calmer, steadier, less reactive, and they might ask what changed. And you can tell them then, not as a performance, not as a lesson, just as a fact, something that happened, something that's true now. But you won't need to tell them, because by then, the change won't be something you have. It'll be something you are. Here's the shift. Before you share anything about your healing, ask yourself one question. Do I need this to be true, or do I need people to know it's true? If the answer is the second one, don't post. Wait. Sit with it. Let the change become solid in private first. Give it a week, a month, however long it takes for you to stop needing anyone else's validation for it to feel real. And here's the practical part. Create a private document, a note on your phone, a journal only you see. Write everything you want to say there. Get it out. Craft the perfect caption. Say the thing you're desperate to announce. Then close it. Let it sit. Come back to it in a week. If the change is still true, you won't need to post it. It'll have integrated. It'll be part of how you live, not something you need to declare. And if it's not still true, you just saved yourself from performing a breakthrough you hadn't actually had. This practice does something important. It separates the impulse to share from the need to process. Both are valid, but they're not the same thing. And when you give yourself a container for the sharing impulse that isn't public, you stop using other people as your journal. You also start to notice how much of your healing was real and how much was just rehearsal. The stuff that lasts doesn't need an audience. It doesn't fade when no one's watching. It just becomes who you are. And that version of growth is the only one that holds. So you're back at your phone. You've written the caption again. The one about the boundary you're setting. The realization you had. The old version of yourself you're leaving behind. Your thumb hovers over the button. But this time, you notice the need underneath the urge. You see it clearly. You want someone to tell you it's real. You want the confirmation. The witnesses. And you realize you don't actually need them. The work you did yesterday is still true today, even if no one knows about it. The change is still happening. The growth is still real. So you close the app, you put the phone down, and you go live the thing you almost performed. Because the people who need to know will see it in how you show up, and the ones who don't never would have understood the caption anyway. Growth doesn't need an audience. It just needs you.